There's a switch inside every man that decides whether he stays quiet or finally says what he feels. It has nothing to do with how much he loves you. It's about whether he feels safe enough to risk it. Realistian researcher John Gottman spent decades studying what makes people close up instead of open up. And the pattern is almost always the same. It's never a lack of feeling. It's fear of what happens if the feeling isn't returned. Tonight, 7 quiet shifts that flip that switch. Not tricks, not games, just an honest understanding of how his fear works and how to work with it instead of against it. If this speaks to you, take a second to like, share, and subscribe, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly what's been holding him back before he ever has to say a word. 1. The a priori balance. There's a particular kind of worry that shows up when a reply that used to come in seconds suddenly takes an hour. It's rarely about the hour itself. It's about what the mind fills that hour with. Was something said wrong? Is interest faded? Is this the beginning of the end? Most of the time, none of that is true. The real explanation is simpler and a little less flattering. When someone is always available, the mind eventually stops registering them as anything to notice. This doesn't call for coldness or a sudden retreat. It calls for something much smaller, a life that isn't built around waiting by the phone, replying when it feels natural rather than the instant a message arrives, staying busy sometimes, not as a performance for anyone, but because there's genuinely something else going on. A man who has always received an immediate response rarely stops to ask himself what that response is worth. The moment it stops being guaranteed, though, something shifts. He starts noticing the gap, and inside that gap, feeling finally has room to grow. A Valier, it turns out, was never a switch. It behaves more like a dial, and the moment he starts wondering where someone is, tends to be the exact moment he realizes how much he wants them there. 2. 1 layer deeper. Most conversations with men never make it past the surface, and it's rarely his fault. It's the questions: how was work collects fine. What music do you like collects a genre. None of it asks him to actually think. Then there's the other kind of question. What song does he put on when he doesn't want to talk to anyone? What does he miss most about being a kid? And something in the exchange changes almost immediately. He has to pause. He has to decide what to share and what to leave out. And that small decision does more work than an hour of small talk ever could. Arthur Aaron's research on closeness found this is exactly how emotional intimacy gets built. Not through pleasant chatter, but through questions that ask someone to reveal what they don't usually say out loud. Each honest answer does 2 things at once. It hands you a little more trust, and it leaves him feeling more connected than he expected to. None of it registers as significant in the moment. Then, without any single conversation standing out, it adds up to nearly everything. 3. Understood, not impressed. Every man has met people who try to impress him. Funny stories, achievements, the places they've been, and the things they own. It's pleasant enough in the moment, and forgotten almost as fast. Admiration is cheap to give and cheap to lose. What actually stays with someone is different. The sense that another person can see past the version of him everyone else gets. Psychologist Carl Rogers spent his career on exactly this. The idea that people don't open up because they've been persuaded to. They open up when they feel understood without being corrected or managed. In practice, that looks unglamorous. Listening instead of waiting for a turn to speak. Reflecting back not just the words, but what sat underneath them. None of it feels dramatic while it's happening. But being truly understood is one of the quietest, addictive feelings a person can have, and he will start to associate that feeling with the one person who actually gave it to him, not with people in general. 4. The small honesty rule. Most people default to agreement. They nod along, echo an opinion back, instead of offering one of their own. Convinced that agreement is what makes them likable. It rarely works that way. Taken far enough, constant agreement turns a person into a mirror, and nobody falls for a reflection. There's nothing to hold on to in it. No edges, no surprise, nothing underneath. Small honesty works differently. Disagreeing gently about something that doesn't really matter, a movie, a restaurant, signals something bigger than the disagreement itself. What you say is real. Once that's established, it carries into everything that follows. When something that does matter finally gets said, he believes it. because nothing before it gave him a reason not to. Brené Brown's line on this has stuck for a reason. Winnability is the birthplace of connection. The small honesty is what earns the big trust. If this already sounds familiar, say so in the comments. It helps the next person find this exactly when they need it. 5. Presence, then absence. When I'm with her, it feels like she's the only person in the room. When I'm not, I can't explain why I keep thinking about her. A man said that once, almost embarrassed by how simple it sounded, and it captures something most people get backward about closeness. Instinct says to close every gap, answer faster, show up more, prove how much you care by never stepping back. The opposite tends to work better. Not coldness, and not a strategy dressed up as one, just being completely, warmly present when you're together, and then actually returning to your own life when you're not. Most people manage one half of that. Constant availability that erases all tension, or deliberate distance that just reads as disinterest. Almost nobody holds both at once. Gottman describes this kind of consistent, attuned presence as a bid for connection. But the bid only means something if it isn't constant. When someone is fully there and then genuinely gone, it creates a contrast the mind can't quite settle. And the way it settles that tension usually isn't by drifting away from the feeling. It's by leaning further into it. This one is easy to get backward because it feels almost counterintuitive. But it might be the single biggest thing that decides whether feelings stay quiet or finally get said out loud. 6. A world of your own. Every couple ends up with at least one thing that means nothing to anyone else. A phrase, an inside joke, a memory that shouldn't have been funny but somehow still is, months later. It usually starts from nothing. A random comment, a small mistake, a moment that had no reason to be memorable. These small, specific things function like threads. Any one of them looks insignificant alone. But the more of them accumulate, the more they weave into something that starts to feel irreplaceable. And when a relationship has enough of these threads, losing the person stops meaning just losing someone to talk to. It means losing an entire private world that only existed because two people built it together. That's a harder thing to walk away from than a handful of good memories. And it's often the fear of losing exactly that, more than anything else, that finally pushes someone to say what they've been holding back. 7. Let him picture it. We'd actually love this place. We should go sometime, said lightly, almost thrown away. That kind of sentence does more than it sounds like it should. There's a version of talking about the future that backfires completely. The heavy kind, the where do you see this going kind, that turns a relationship into something closer to an interview. This isn't that. This is a festival mentioned in passing, a show that gets saved for later, nothing that demands an answer or a label. The mind doesn't need permission to picture something though. Once it's been shown an image, it tends to hold on to it. A future that's been imagined even briefly starts to feel a little real and a little worth having when someone starts picturing a life that includes you. Without ever being asked to, it gets harder and harder to picture one that doesn't. That's rarely a loud moment. It's usually the quietest one that does the most work. The moment a future stops being hypothetical and starts, without anyone saying so out loud, becoming something he's already choosing. None of this is a performance, and none of it forces something that isn't there. Silence, more often than not, has fear sitting underneath it. The fear of saying too much, too soon. The fear of being the only one who feels it, and every person carries a different amount of that fear, shaped by everything they lived through before you. Some people open up quickly, others take longer, and no amount of patience rushes a heart that isn't ready yet. That's not failure, that's just honesty. What actually moves things forward is safety, consistent, unhurried, real. And once that safety is finally enough, nobody needs to be convinced to say what they feel. It gets said simply because for the first time it feels safe enough to be true. If this found you at the right moment, send it to someone who needs to hear it, and take a second to like and subscribe. And if you've been the one quietly waiting for someone to feel safe with you, hold on. That kind of patience rarely goes unnoticed forever.